Okay, everyone okay?
Yes.
Good evening to both debating teams and fellow audience. The motion for today's debate is the death penalty and if it should be abolished. On the government team, we have Phoebe as the first speaker, Yen as the second speaker, Pei Lin as the third speaker, Joanna as the fourth speaker, and Phui Mun as the fifth speaker. On the opposition team, we have Carmen as the first speaker, Jeff as the second speaker, Ze Qing as the third speaker, Sharvin as the fourth speaker, and Dianne as the final speaker. Before we proceed with the debate, allow me to lay down some ground rules. The first is each speaker is given 3 minutes to present your points. At the end of the debate will be a 5-minute question exchange session between both teams. And should there be any POIs, please use the raise hand feature and the speaker will get the option to accept or decline. If both teams are ready, we shall begin the debate with the first speaker from the government team.
Good evening. My name is Phoebe and I'm the first speaker representing the government side. Today, my team and I will be talking about why the Malaysian government should be removing the death penalty. Malaysia currently has 1,281 prisoners on death row. In Malaysia, criminals are placed under the death penalty if they have committed a murder, are involved in drug trafficking, firearm, treason, and waging war against the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. Anyone in Malaysia would be sentenced to death if they were to commit any of these crimes, regardless of their nationality. The death penalty has been proven to be ineffective in decreasing crime rates. Instead, in 2017, it was revealed in the Malaysian parliament that there was an increase of drug cases every year despite the drastic measures taken by the police, which we could take as including the fact of existence of the mandatory death penalty for Section 39B DDA, known as Dangerous Drug Act 1952 drug trafficking. It may be the same for murder, but it is difficult as Malaysia stopped revealing actual statistics under the previous government. A just alternative punishment would be life imprisonment. This keeps the convicted away from society without stripping of basic human rights to live. This would be a suitable alternative as the support for death penalties stems from the desire to be free from crime, which can be obtained with a life sentence. This is shown in a poll done in the US. The poll showed a decrease in the support for the death penalty from 65% to 48% when the life imprisonment without parole was offered as an option. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Sofea, for coming today, and thank you, government team, for giving that first statement. But I would like to first rebuttal on your point. You mentioned that the death penalty is not effective and that deterrence doesn't work. Well, I'm here to explain that deterrence does work. Sentencing people to the death penalty is not only a punishment for the offenders, but also deters the rest of society from unlawful action. It makes people think twice before committing crimes. Even if studies regarding deterrence are inclusive, that is only because the death penalty is rarely used and takes years before an execution is actually carried out. You also mentioned that the safety of society can be assured with just the life sentence. Yes, life sentencing would be a better choice compared to the death penalty, but in case you're not aware, we're actually having an overcrowding issue in Malaysia prisons, which my group will elaborate further on later. And you're not factoring in the numbers of prisoners who would escape prison or commit bribery to avoid their life sentences or the death penalty. And that's why we, the opposition team, believe that the death penalty should not be abolished. Reason being retribution, deterrence, closure, reduction of government funding, and overcrowding of prison cells. Before I go on about the first point, I would like to give a quick introduction about the death row prisoners in Malaysia. Death row prisoners. They are prisoners that are categorized as high risk and consist of those who have been sentenced to death by hanging by the courts. Capital punishment is a legal penalty in Malaysia. It is a mandatory punishment for murder, drug trafficking, treason, waging war against the king, and of course, terrorism and rapists. In October of 2018, the Malaysian government announced that it would be tabling a bill to abolish the death penalty. But, however, in March of 2019, the government announced that they have decided that they will not abolish the death penalty. Accordingly, we, the opposition team, believe that the death penalty should not be abolished, mainly because of retribution and justice. Do the people who commit horrendous crimes really deserve to continue living? The death penalty is a punishment reserved for the most heinous crimes such as murder. Why should a murderer be allowed to continue living out the rest of their lives in relative comfort, paid by the public, to continue to house, clothe, and feed them for the remainder of their natural life at taxpayer expense makes a mockery of justice. The Malaysian justice system is well known for using the term an eye for an eye to justify capital punishment, meaning the offenders will be sentenced to punishment fit for their crimes. Not to mention, when the life of an innocent person is taken, the balance of justice is disturbed. Unless that balance is restored, society succumbs to the rule of violence. Only the taking of the murderer's life restores the balance and allows society to show convincingly that murder is an intolerable crime and will be punished in kind. Additionally, supporters of the death penalty believes that those who commit murder because they have taken the life of others have forfeited their right to live. Furthermore, they believe that capital punishment is just a form of retribution, expressing and enforcing the moral indignation and not only of the victim's relative but of law-abiding citizens in general. And that's why we, the opposition team, believe that Malaysia should not abolish the death penalty. Thank you.
Hello, I'm the second speaker for the government side. Before I start going into my point, I'd like to rebuild your point. So despite extensive research in this area, however, there is no conclusive evidence as to whether death penalty has a deterrent effect on crime rates. Another point you made is the crimes that people commit should be punished. But what if those people did not commit their crimes? And that brings me to my first point. Even though it's necessary to present evidence when in court, mistakes are sometimes made in law. With the death penalty present in Malaysia, there are chances when innocent people can be wrongfully convicted and executed. After all, the police, prosecutor, and judges, lawyers are humans and capable of making mistakes. Defense lawyer Samantha Chong states that it's also possible that the policemen have zero principles. This could lead to false conviction and execution. She also brought up that if the court only have the word of police against the word of the suspect, who are they more likely to believe? A non-government organization called Human Rights Watch stated that the lack of police accountability in Malaysia facilities abusive and sometimes practices deadly police. Vague policies, substandards, training, lack of transparency, and failure of leadership to investigate and prevent illegal practices all creates opportunity for police abuse. The police department have appeared to abdicate their responsibility by not making the policies changes necessary to ensure effective oversight and accountability in cases of wrongful death, mistreatment in custody, and excessive use of force. A legal case held in Sharvin High Court in October 2017, a 20-year-old Korean student was arrested for possession of 219 grams of marijuana in the student's apartment premises. At that, the police insisted that the student was the sole person on the scene. In this scenario, as possession of drugs is punishable with death penalty, the 20-year-old Korean student should be punished with death penalty. However, when the defendant lawyer showed a CCTV recording of other people on the scene, it was found that the witness who had testified against the accused admitted that he lied, and the defendant was free. By this case, we can see that mistakes are often happen in laws, and people can simply accuse people of their crimes. And that's for me. Thank you.
Right. Before I come to my own arguments, let us first have a look at the aforementioned point that mistakes are sometimes made in the law and there will be innocent people who will be wrongly prosecuted. Executing the innocent is a rare but acceptable risk of the death penalty. There is no proof that any innocent people has actually been executed since the increased safeguards and appeals were added to our death system in the 1970s. Even if such executions have occurred, they are very rare. Imprisoning innocent people is also wrong, but we cannot empty the prisons because of that minimal risk. If improvements are needed in the system of representation or in the use of scientific evidence such as DNA testing, then those reforms should be instituted. However, the need for reform is not a reason to abolish the death penalty. Besides, many of the claims of innocence by those who have been released from the death row are actually based on legal technicalities. Just because someone's conviction is overturned years after the prosecutor decides not to retry him does not mean he's actually innocent. If it can be shown that someone is innocent, surely the governor would grant clemency and spare the person. Hypothetical claims of innocence are usually just delaying tactics to put off the execution as long as possible. Given our thorough system of appeals through numerous states and 2,000 federal courts, the execution of an innocent person today is almost impossible. Even theoretical execution of an innocent person can be justified because the death penalty saves lives by deterring other killings. And as the third speaker, because Jeff is lagging, I will continue on with my point. The application of capital punishment in just ways can limit prison overpopulation issues and inevitably free up prison cells. My argument: there are already 52 prison institutions throughout Malaysia and has gotten to the point where overcrowding in prisons is becoming a serious problem. Malaysia's criminal justice system became so overcrowded with prisoners that the federal courts had to step in to order changes or risk letting convicted prisoners loose because there was no room to house them. This is why our country has only come to the realization to reduce prison inmates instead of building more jails to house them in 2019. There were 1,281 people alone on death row. Among them, 932 were drug traffickers, and the other 300 odd includes 19 who were involved in the Lahad Datu intrusion incident. By managing this process so that it is efficient, including any appeals or pleadings which are legally permitted, it becomes possible to manage the population and limit costs without creating the potential for harm in the rest of society. Adding on to the matter, in most prison systems, it is also noted that one prison made prisoners sleep in shifts to mitigate. Overcrowding can be so severe that they result in tying themselves to window bars so that they can sleep while standing. This was due to lack of beds for a 10-person cell housing 20 prisoners, forcing them to take turns with 10 to stand while the other 10 slept, as reported by Malaysian Minister Datuk Leong Ze Qing. Also, rather than keeping those who deserve the death penalty imprisoned and taking up space for those who are in prison for detention, for example, women and children, it would be wiser to turn the attention towards the latter, who are already given little attention and tend to be even more neglected in overcrowded and overstretched prison systems. These groups in detention are particularly adversely affected by prison overcrowding. According to a study done in 2018 as well by UNSRID, the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, the compilation of the classified indicators of the 4 countries allows a direct comparison on their quality indicators in the dimensions of welfare, rehabilitation, and reintegration, as well as the overall prison regime of each country. Furthermore, the comparative scale reflecting the Nelson Mandela rules helps identify some general tendencies. Malaysia has scored the lowest among the 4 countries and meets only the absolute minimum requirements of the Nelson Mandela rules. Are you sure you would like to keep housing more inmates, overcrowding prisons, and using more taxpayer money to keep them there?
Okay, thank you from the third speaker of the opposition team, and good afternoon, everyone. Before I present my point, the third speaker of the opposition contended that death penalty will free up the prison cells in Malaysia, and I would like to make a rebuttal to it. It is given that fact that punishing criminals to death, it frees up the prison cells for more criminals. But however, the bigger issue at hand shouldn't be having more cells to lock other prisoners, but instead be trying to find a way to reduce the crime rate in Malaysia. And by freeing up the prison cells, it will not lower the crime rate, which should be the focus of our government. And as the third speaker from the government team, we contended that the system of death penalty is easily abused by the authorities. Firstly, according to a 2019 report from Amnesty International, representatives of foreign embassies indicated that they usually receive a notification of the arrest of their nationals after more than 24 hours or even days, which usually end up with unable to seek assistance from their consular authorities at the time of the arrest. And secondly, there are insufficient access of interpreters, as some legal representatives told Amnesty International that persons who do not understand Malay have been asked by police to sign documents in Malay. For instance, according to an article from Vice, there was one case that foreign woman had all her questions answered by her boyfriend during interrogation because he could speak English, and she was then sentenced to death while he was later released. And another significant case study, Hu Yuhua, a Malaysian Chinese, was arrested at the age of 20 in 2005 with his girlfriend, and he was sentenced to death for drug trafficking. He was alleged that the police broke his finger and threatened to beat his girlfriend when they forced him to sign a confession. And also, an article from Amnesty International, the interviewees said that it was common for defendants to get beaten up to extract confessions. And hence, I'll conclude my point here that the death penalty system is easily abused with all the cases I stated earlier. Thank you.
Okay, hi. So I'm the second speaker for against abolishing death penalty. So sorry, I'm facing some technical difficulty just now. So okay, so my point for against abolishing death penalty would be deterrence. Deterrence, such as a death sentence or death penalty, is an effective way to make people think twice before committing crimes. Mainly because some crimes are too heinous and wrong to be forgiven, like drug trafficking, kidnapping, or even murders. And since our society has always been using punishment to discourage people from wrongdoings, even in our educational system, so I don't really see the point of not applying the same thing to those what would be potential criminals who are doing unlawful actions. And take our neighbor country as an example, Singapore. With such harsh punishment towards their criminals, it has definitely a positive effect on how their governments deter their society. Judging by the crime rates between Singapore and Malaysia, theirs is significantly lower. In fact, it is actually 50% lower in crime rates compared to Malaysia. And yes, their country is much smaller and have a smaller population, but it doesn't matter because the crime rate is judged fairly from the percentage of their population. Anyway, my point is that this has proven that deterrence has definitely made Singapore a better place and safer place to be. And because with our society having the highest interest in preventing murders from happening, it should also use the strongest punishment that is available on the table, which is the death penalty, to deter those potential murderers. With that being said, when murderers are sentenced to death and executed, those potential murderers that is out there will very likely think twice before they actually commit a crime because they have the fear of actually losing their own life in the end of the day. And like how Carmen said just now, even if some studies regarding deterrence are inconclusive, that is only because the death penalty is rarely used in our country, providing that the number of crimes that we have had. And it takes years for an execution to actually take place or being carried out. In other words, the death penalty indirectly saves lives actually, because as for those potential murderers, as previously mentioned, they will have a better reason to think twice, especially when they know that their life is on the line. Ultimately, only the most severe punishment possible will dissuade the most violent crimes. Only then will it be clear that some of the laws or penalties are meant to be strict, and it should be everyone's responsibility in obeying it. And because taking an innocent's life or taking things into your own hands in terms of murdering, it would also mean forfeiting your own life as well. So yeah, that's all.
Thank you to Jeff, the speaker. second speaker. I'd like to voice out some concerns, a rebuttal point to your argument of deterrence. Singapore and Malaysia are brought up differently. They are far more advanced than us. Hence, deterrence from the death penalty cannot be the only factor taken into thought here. I also like to share my points, which is I'm the first speaker of the government side supporting the abolishment of the death penalty. I'll be arguing that sentencing a criminal to death causes a psychological burden on the judges. As a judge, it is necessary to abide by the law. And according to the law, some crimes are penalized with mandatory death sentences. However, there are also some offenses that fall under discretionary death penalty, whereby the decision on death sentencing is made by the judges, acting on total independence according to the federal constitution. The former member of the parliament, Liu Chin-tong, shared his experience when talking to several retired judges, that they had psychological struggles when passing the death sentence. Such a harsh sentence weighed on their conscience, that they had to pray and deliberate for days before they made a decision, especially since there were some cases where the mistakes are made in the law, causing an innocent person to be executed. The judges are aware that such a sentence is irreversible. By wrongly executing someone, not only do they feel the burden of letting the criminal go free, but that they also have hurt the innocent and the innocent person's family. In the case where the criminal is being executed, just because they have committed crimes, it does not mean that the judgment is easy on the judges either. Thank you.
There is a POI from Jeff. Would you like to accept or decline?
Okay, so Joe was saying that it is a huge psychological burden to the judges to make the call on to end someone else's life, right? So I disagree with that because, okay, let's talk about doctor for an example. Doctor operating a surgery is it's also a very psychological burden, right? So the patient's life is in the doctor's hand, but that doesn't mean that we should stop operating surgeries and stop saving lives, right? Anyway, when the judges take on the job or duty to be a judge, they should know the psychological pressure that is going to be on their shoulders, and it is their responsibility, I believe, to take on the pressure, or they should just resign, because it's not fair for the laws or penalties to be changed to make the judges' life easier, even if it is a difficult job for the judges or difficult call for them to make to end someone's life. Surely the call happens for a reason, right? And the criminal themselves should be well aware of the consequences before they actually commit those crimes.
Am I supposed to say something back? I think you mentioned that the doctors, it is part of the doctor's job that they when they operate on somebody. But here's the thing, they also practice before. It's not like the judges will practice sentencing somebody to death. Thank you. Declined.
Can we move on to the next speaker?
Jeff, did you raise up your hands? You want to say something?
Joe declined the POI, so he cannot continue.
Okay, cool. All right.
Next speaker, please.
So I guess I'll be the next speaker then. My point is, by abolishing the death penalty, it also increases government funding. The Deputy Home Minister Dato' Wan Junaidi Tuanku Jaafar said that the government had allocated a total of RM 655.96 million to the prison department for operational purposes between 2010 until 2012. In 2019, the average cost of 37 to 41 ringgit included clothing, daily needs, security, and general cleanliness. Food alone cost 7 ringgit and 98 cents per prisoner a day. In other words, the minimum daily cost involved for 65,222 prisoners would be at least over 2.4 million. And in a year, it would cost 880 million ringgit. In 2016, Malaysia allocated increase safety measures in prisons.
Overcrowding prisons is also another issue. Sabah Prisons Department spends about 140 million. Deputy Home Minister Dato Mohd Aziz Jamal said among other issues raised by the authorities was the issue that 5,000 capacity prisons in the state were overpopulated by 2,000 people, which potentially pose security threats. On solutions for the overcrowded prisons, he said another premise was being built in Lahadatu, which means the money had to come out from our pockets to build a whole other building just to house all these prisons. Aziz also said that the staff also deserved an increase of their money, special incentive allowance of RM 150 to 200 as their uniform bodies due to their nature of their job, having to face prisoners every day. That is all.
Thank you. Before going into my point, I would like to make a rebuttal to my opponent's point. As you say, having in an online online new platform written in 2018, it referred to an article written by the senior superintendent of prison in Malaysia stated that there are no scientific research that show the cost of each death penalty. The article also stated that the death penalty involved a high cost compared to alternative penalties. Although it can be argued that death penalty is cost effective, a human life should not be taken for financial motive. This can desensitize society as a whole as we learn to dehumanize and consent people to death. Okay. I am the last speaker on the government side supporting the abolishment of death penalty. The government team has continuously stated that death penalty is not a necessary way to punish the criminals. Does death penalty help to decrease the crime rate in our country? Does every criminal deserve to die? No, I would say that death penalty is not solving the root of the problem for the criminals. For example, rape that resulting in death is one of the criminal offenses that carries the death penalty. Like in the year of 2000, No Suzaili Martha was a rape victim who was murdered by a bus driver, Hanafi Mat Hassan. He remained unremorseful of his crime throughout his detention after exhausting his final appeal against the sentence at the Federal Court on December 12, 2006. He was hanged on 2008 at the Sungai Buloh prison. Although the victim was raped and has gone through trauma, the victim suffered in both mentally and physically. The families of the victim will also experience the pain of losing their loved one and go through psychological burden as well. On the other hand, as the criminal itself who committed the crime, he raped someone and was sentenced to death penalty. But did he really know that he did something wrong? Can things be solved if he is really hanged? Why not solve the root of the problem first and let the criminal realize that something he did is wrong? All in all, as the government team, I strongly support the abolishment of death penalty. There are many alternative ways to punish the criminals other than death penalty. Not only it does not deter the criminals, it's also unable to solve the root of the problem in a criminal. Thank you.
Sofea, are you there?
Yes. Are we going to have Dianne speak again?
No,
No?
Carmen's raising up her
Sorry.
hand.
POI.
Yeah.
But her time is up. But you still like to accept or decline? There are two POIs from Sharvin and Carmen.
Dianne, you can choose which one.
Yeah. Phui Mun, would you like to respond to the two POIs that you have?
Wait. Should I?
No worry, I won't bite.
You will. Okay. I would like to hear from Carmen.
Alright, so I have to say is, although the victim and the victim's family cannot be restored to the status which preceded the murder, at least an execution brings closure to the criminal's crimes, or closure to the ordeal for the victim's family, and ensures that the murderer will create no more victims in the future. Offenders gave up their right to life when they took the life of another person, and justice can only be served by their lawful execution. Any lesser punishment would be undermining the value of society placing on the protection of lives. That's all, since we don't have time.
If anyone else wants to raise any questions, you can raise your hand because we are at the 5-minute question exchange session now. Yes, Sharvin, POI.
Yeah, Pui Min, you said that there should
Mun.
be an alternate Pui
Pui
Mun,
Mun.
sorry, Pui Mun. You said that should be an alternative other than the death penalty, right? What do you suggest the alternative would be?
Rehabilitation. Maybe.
So because my point just now was like, because it's going to cost more, right? So I think if you put them in rehabilitation, it's going to cost even more.
But why can you compare a life with money?
Because in my opinion, I think if you've come to the point where you've taken someone else's life, I don't think you deserve a second chance. I think you had your chance then.
Who are you to choose to take someone's life? You are not the god. And of course, why at first they commit the crime? Why? We should find out the reason why. Maybe they have some mental issue or something, maybe. But yeah.
But it's ironic because you say it's not their right to take someone's life, but the killer has taken someone's life anyway also.
People make mistakes. Yes. Yes.
That's a very bad mistake though.
What if they didn't kill anyone?
I think that's why you have like trials, right? Like it takes months before you actually pass on the death penalty. So I think by then you would know if that person is guilty or not.
Okay, we have 2 more questions from Ze Qing and Carmen. Who wants to go first? And please state who you want to question. Thank you.
Yes, actually, Sofea, I haven't debated yet. I'm the last speaker.
Yeah, okay, you can go on.
Okay, so I'll be the last speaker for the opposition side. So closure for the victim's family are often held out as one of the many reasons for supporting death penalty. And closure is sometimes used to refer to the sense of relief, a sense of justice, and the ability to move on, and that comes of speaking publicly about one's loss. and they can finally put the crime behind them and move on, knowing that there is no more possibility of a person who took away their loved one ever leaving prison and walking free. And for the families of victims, the grief, anger, and pain a murder leaves in and keeps victims involved in the tragedy for years, even decades, as multiple hearings, appeals, and trial drag on. As a result, the family member feels stuck in the time warp, being repeatedly re-traumatized by the legal system and accompanying media coverage. Is it reasonable to only sentence the prisoner to mandatory life imprisonment? Although the freedom of the guilty defendant is taken away, it is far not enough because thinking in a more logical, reasonable, and sympathetic way, life imprisonment will not satisfy the citizen and the victim's family to calm their anger and grief. The surviving family pain doesn't disappear even when the execution takes place, but at least there is a sense of justice. So knowing that the convicted person is no longer going to bring harms to the society, not only brings peace to the victim's family, but also the people and the society. So this is why death sentence is strongly encouraged to be imposed on such extreme circumstances. So that's all.
Okay, allow me to conclude for the opposition. I end with a concluding thought. When a life is lost and taken away forcibly by someone, there will be an imbalance to justice, which results in society succumbing to a rule of violence. This is why we are pro-death sentence, and we are all about retribution, deterrence, closure, reducing taxpayer money, as well as freeing up prison cells. I throw this question to all the members of the floor. If someone were to murder a family member of yours in cold blood, what would you request the government to do to that said individual? Unless you have personally experienced it, you are speaking from a morally inclined seat. Thank you.
Any other questions by any team? Question from Carmen.
Okay, so
You're muting.
right, so I just want to ask Pui Mun. She mentioned that who are we to take someone's life? Are you forgetting that they are criminals who have offended the Malaysian law? And you mentioned that what if they were innocent? Well, there is always a null process before the actual sentencing of the death penalty is given. It is where offenders could actually request to go through a pardon process. Additional information can be given out, and death penalty isn't just given out randomly. There is always crucial evidence. That's all.
Phui Mun, are you planning on responding?
Um. Uh. No.
Question from Jeff.
Hi, yeah. So can I ask not opposition, but their team to summarize their points?
Okay, so as a summary, our points were that the death sentence is not effective, that the death penalty is an easy way out for the criminals, the death penalty poses as a psychological burden on the judges, the death penalty, there are sometimes mistakes in the law, and that the innocent are killed instead of the criminal, and that the system is easily abused. Thank you.
Government or opposition team, is there anything else you would like to add? or rebut? If that is all, can we have a summary from the government team?
As a summary, the death sentence should be abolished because the death sentence is actually not effective, does not deter criminals. It is an easy way out for the criminal. It poses as a psychological burden on the judges. The system is easily abused, and that mistakes are sometimes made in the law, and an innocent is sometimes murdered instead of the criminal. Thank you.
Okay, we've come to the end of the debate. Thank you to both teams for participating. If there is nothing else to add, we can end our debate session now. Thank you.